Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? My name is Dan, the Jazz Shepherd. I'm sure most of you know. Hope you're all doing well today. It's a Sunday morning here in Minnesota. It's a little foggy outside. Kind of sets the mood for some elegance, some spiritual, some bluesy, some light. I just been kind of going through some records, feeling some fun vibes. I'm just gonna throw a few things out at you guys. Nothing series oriented right here. It's just gonna be a fun, light affair today. This version of Lover Man is really outstanding. A young gal by the name of Pat Moran is playing some of that fantastic piano. This is the Pat Moran Quartet on Bethlehem. This is number 6018. She has a second one here in Bethlehem, 56 and 57. This is also the same four. And the group is made of a John Doling on the bass, a John Whited on the drums, and a great singer by the name of Bev Kelly that I honestly didn't connect it till today. I've only listened to these records once or twice. I had it for a couple years, and I pulled it out today, like, hey, let's put this on. And I recognized the name Bev Kelly. I'm like, wait, not Beverly Kenny, Bev Kelly. She does have a couple records I know about. And this Bev Kelly has a couple of great Riverside records from 58, 59, which would come after these two here. There she is on the cover. She's a blonde here. Love Locked Out. This is a great record. This record's with Kenny Burrell, Milt Hinton, Jerome Richardson, O.C. Johnson, Harry Edison's on it. It's a pretty outstanding session. And so I was surprised, actually, that I hadn't noticed before that the Bev Kelly that does these two Riversides, there she is as a brunette, actually, blonde on this one. I was surprised to find out that that's the same gal singing with the Pat Moran Quartet here in 56 and 57. Listening to the record, it's a bit of a mixed affair. It's live at Birdland. While at Birdland, it's called. I'm really enjoying Pat Moran, the piano player. Female musicians are always fun to dig into. It's something I think I'm going to do a little episode on. Some of my favorite gals in jazz at some point. So many of them end up being singers, and the number that are players is kind of minimal. And a couple of the great ones don't have a ton of records out there. It's dope. The great trombone player Melba Liston, she doesn't have a lot of records under her name. Mary Lou Williams, piano player, not a lot of music under her name. So there are some great female musicians out there, but they just didn't get the opportunity. And in some ways, they probably had less opportunity than some of the black musicians did. I'll say this, I said this about politics even. It's one thing for a white guy to let a black guy into the room. At least I've played football with him before, basketball. But to let a girl in, that's a different club. We're not sure we want to do that. So the girls have definitely been locked out of a lot of the history of art. Again, it's a fun record. Oscar Pettiford's on the bass right there. Earl Swope on the trombone. Burt Collins on the trumpet. The great Nat Pierce is conducting and arranging. Sam Most, Tony Ortega, and Dick Meldonian. Recorded in New York, March and April 1957. Her records are pretty tough to come by. Both of these Bethlehem records, won't just find them in a store very often. You know, you could probably be in some antique shop in Callicoon, New York. You know, some little antique thrift place. And they might, you know, but they're just not something you see very much. Obviously, Bethlehem was marketing very much to a white audience. But I really do enjoy those records. And I'm going to give you a little bit of this fantastic Riverside Bev Kelly. It's just crazy how, no matter how much you know about jazz, you're always kind of learning more. You're always kind of, yeah. Perfect Sunday morning.
My ship has sailed.
She's a nice singer.
That I'm made of sail.
And she's kind of unheralded in a lot of ways.
Its decks are trimmed with gold.
She's got a little spice to her for sure.
And a jam and spice.
And she says the word spice right after that. That's pretty cosmic. But yeah, this Love Locked Out record is fantastic. And this is live at the Coffee Gallery in San Francisco in person. Both on Riverside in 58, 59. And definitely they're albums that, if you see them, they shouldn't cost you big bucks. It's gorgeous. Roy Haynes on the drums on this. Great lineup. It really is. There's just so many artists that slip through the cracks. And everybody's out there collecting the same 10 artists. You know, digging out the same records over and over again. Reviewing and talking about the same records. And there's so much great jazz. And so much of it captures different moods. I think that's one of the keys is jazz doesn't sound like one thing. Jazz has a very wide scope. You can use it to create almost any mood you want. And so many people seem to be just boxed into this. It's got to be really noisy and really edgy for it to be good. It had to cost $300. And I talked the guy down to $220. I got a deal. And that's such a small part of the book. I don't want to belabor that point. I'm going to move on, but there's a lot of great, fun to listen to, beautiful jazz music that just is so under the radar today. And like I've discussed in the last few episodes, the vinyl community is very much guilty of just promoting the same echo chamber of music. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. There's a lot of great music. This is some beast stuff here. Finger popping. Finger popping's always been one of my favorite Horace Silver sessions. There's some fire from Blue Mitchell right there. Junior Cook, Eugene Taylor, Louis Hayes. So it's a pretty standard silver quintet at this point. This record's always been one that I just found to be as edgy as Horace Silver gets. But there's some edge there. There's some velocity. Louis Hayes is laying down the tracks. Eugene Taylor's. And Blue Mitchell, it's not something we hear at tempo all the time. He's more of a mid-tempo guy, you know. And here he's certainly being propulsed along by the river that the rhythm section of Horace, Eugene, and Louis is laying down. And now there's Junior Cook, another very unheralded guy. And Blue Mitchell, while he was with Horace Silver, was making great records at Riverside. Junior Cook only gets one on Jazzland, the Riverside sub-label, and that's a great record as well. But really kind of an underappreciated group. You know, everyone's talking about all the great groups from this era, and we forget that Horace Silver was an original jazz messenger. And this quintet that he puts together here, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, they make some serious records. And there's something about Horace Silver's personality that I find magnanimous. Magnanimous, thank you. Someone else mentioned this to me, and it's very true. He's the one guy on Blue Note that none of his photos are just him in the studio being captured by Frank Wolf. His photos are out and about in the city streets of New York consistently. Very much so. 7 Pieces of Silver, the Stylings of Silver. These records they show him outside. And I think Frank Wolf's still doing the photography. Yep, Francis Wolf, Rudy Van Gelder. But this to me has some wonderful, powerful, dark, spiritual hard bop tones to it. And Horace Silver to me is a guy that, even though he's very much a pocket player and very much a guy that swings, his parents were from Cape Verde Islands, if I recall, and he was brought up in, I think, Connecticut, just outside of New York, and he's very much influenced by that sphere of New York piano players, which I've talked about. But he seems also to have a less militant take on it than Blakey and that set of messengers, but he does feel this need to vent his frustration with this group, and they definitely are underappreciated by today's collector. You know, Blue Mitchell, you know, Louis Hayes. There's a lot of thunder going on in records like Finger Pop. That, of course, was the great track. Is this the title track? I think it is. Yeah, it's Finger Pop. This is Juicy Lucy. A nice little track, swinging on the samba, sweet stuff. And there's the link to Count Basie. Minimal, dispersing the notes, setting melody, allowing the whole thing to breathe and to pulse. Jazz is such an important part of daily life, and it's reflected in so much of the pulses and the rhythms of life as we know it. And just because we don't always recognize those connections, jazz is definitely at the finger, at the heartbeat of so much of the American lifestyle. And it might not always condone our life choices, but it's certainly aware of them, and it certainly has something to say about it. A record now that's what I used to like a lot more than I do now. And these guys get almost too much credit for being spiritual jazz, because there's some wind chimes in it, and you know, it's the bells and the Eastern mythology and titles. But jazz at its root has always been a spiritual music. Jazz has always been a music that comes from the blues and the church. And the black experience has always been one very rooted in a gospel that's trying to find redemption from struggle. And so to give the title of spiritual jazz to this abstract form of jazz that came about by incorporating more world sounds into it, to me is a great disservice to all the spiritual jazz that came before it. You know, there's nothing not spiritual about Basie and his blues. There's nothing not spiritual about all the music that came out by Duke Ellington. Ellington is the sacred. It's again, the scope of the collector today is so minimalized by an industry that's only promoting a small percentage of that music, and there's a lot of white hipsters that think that this is some profound, deep stuff, and there is some profound in it. There is some spirituality in it. You know, Pharoah, of course, works with Coltrane. Probably 63 or 4, he starts showing up, and then he actually joins the group at 65, and by 66 he's got his own first record on Impulse, and he makes a pretty long string of records at Impulse that seem to get further out as we go forward, and these records almost always descend into a great cacophony, a great degree of chaos, and on some level, to me, when the music starts to become something that I would not hear in a black church, that's diminished in spirituality for me. When it's got fingernails clawing at the chalkboard, trying to scratch their way out of the hell that they live in, it has its place, but it's no more sacred than Jimmy Smith. Jimmy Smith can be just as spiritual, you know. It's Grant Green can be just as heavy, and I'm never gonna stop telling people that. It's just insane to me how many people think that the less listenable it is, the better it must be. And this right here is fairly innocuous. Who's the band on this? Upper and Lower East is what we're listening to. I don't see the band listed clearly. It just kind of is one long track here. It's very global in its sound and influence, very far removed from the blues, very far removed from the black church. And that's not to say there's not a human global spirituality, because there absolutely is. And that's what we all need to kind of strive and move towards to, in some sense, to find a unity. But it's very little jazz is happening right here. And I think in a lot of ways, this music was given titles like the avant-garde and like spiritual jazz and out because it didn't fit under the umbrellas of what jazz is and was. And that's part of my issue, is that so many people, there's a little swing right there. So many people have this misconception that the only good jazz is this. And again, this is the end of the line. This is the last station of the subway, you know. And we went through a whole lot of urbanity and spirituality and the blues to get us here. You know, it's a different age. 1966, 1965, the jet set age is in place. Global travel's never been more doable. The cross-culture reference that's happening is happening everywhere. And so for it to be grafting itself into jazz isn't necessarily innovative on these guys' parts. It was more so innovative when Yusef Lateef was doing it in 1957 over at Savoy. But by this point, everybody's got their Pan Am luggage and is flying to Cairo. Everybody's flying to the Middle East, flying to Southeast Asia, flying to Japan, taking in Paris and London. And of course, that age is gone. We're not a traveling, world-connected people no more. We live in our little pocket suburbs, our little wagon driving to the store to get our little groceries. You know, we're disconnected now from the moment of awakening that we had through travel. And there's still a small percentage of the culture that travels, but not like we used to and not like we should. Again, when I came into jazz from psychedelic rock, one of my first places I really got into was Coltrane's Out stuff. I got that. I thought I really dug Pharoah Saunders, Archie Shepp. I listened to a lot of. I never really liked Ornette Coleman that much, to be honest. And there's songs I've learned to appreciate, but I've never been a big Ornette Coleman fan. But the deeper I got into jazz, the more of the jazz I collected, the more you recognize that these records that sold 8,000 copies aren't the be-all and end-all of the story. You know, they're just a small part of what this music is about. And they certainly aren't the definition of spiritual jazz. It's an insult to call this spiritual jazz, to call Alice Coltrane spiritual. She's a freaking art student that never knew struggle in her life. Not like Harry Sweets Edison knew struggle. Not like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong saw struggle. She comes up pampered next to what the guys who came up in the Depression and lived through the war and served in the army and got beat down by the police. I'm not saying Alice Coltrane didn't have her share of sorrow. She's a black woman. That's a tough life on any scope. But black women aren't arrested in the same way black brothers are. Black women aren't getting shot down in the streets and serving in the army the same way black brothers are. And so to think of that as being spiritual jazz and limiting it to 1965 to 1973, it's asinine. This entire music was born and bred of struggle and spirituality and a connection to that struggle and trying to overcome it and finding spirituality. There's nothing more spiritual than Ellington. There's nothing more beautiful than listening to Armstrong play West End blues and hearing that gospel of overcoming through his horn. That right there is awful. And to anybody who thinks they're so profound and they get that and they think it's beautiful, it's not. It's awful. Sounds like a bunch of fucking pigs being tortured, dissected. It's time people wake up. Because the music that doesn't tell a human story, the music that's abstract and without form and without a human connection, is missing so much of the story. And there's a reason why nobody ever tries to ban abstract art. It's got no human empathy or narration to it. Sidney Pollock's not going to tell you the great struggles of the Southern Italians against the Northern Madigan. You know, abstract art's never going to inform us about the battles of Napoleon against the Russians, the Ottomans against the Palestinians, and the Crusaders coming in. There's so much history that abstract art doesn't speak about. It doesn't connect to it. It doesn't give us an emotional context. It's limited in its scope. One last record I want to touch on today is this Bobby Hutcherson record. Just came out, Tone Poet. Never been on vinyl before from what I read. First time on vinyl. This was his first session for Blue Note. Recorded in 1963. It got shelved and his next title dialogue doesn't come until 65. And by 65, the music's changed. He's matured. The outs become more commonplace. But here you find him in a very much more traditional setting with a great band. Joe Henderson, Grant Green, Duke Pearson, Bob Cranshaw, and Al Harewood. And there's some nice photographs on the inside of this showing us those guys. Al Harewood's a guy I've not seen a lot of photos of even. There's Al Harewood on the drums right there. The great Duke Pearson, which I think that's from the Profile Sessions, that photograph. The great Joe Henderson, the great Grant Green, and of course, the young Bobby Hutcherson himself. And this is spiritual. This is the blues. It's a beautifully packaged record by Tone Poet. It's another example of a great session that Blue Note sits on and doesn't issue. And they honestly have shelved dozens, if not hundreds, of sessions that a lot of labels would be dying to put out. And I think for the most part it comes down to resources, money. You know, things were tight at Blue Note. It was never a fortune-making company. You know, they were always a Jimmy Smith record not selling away from their doors being shuttered. They had some moments where they had some success, but Blue Note wasn't something that, you know, was making money hand over fist at any point in their career. And so you have to, at some point, choose, let's put this one out, let's hold on to that one for now. And something's just never made it back out. And there were so many cats on the studio roster. New sections were always being tracked. New guys were always joining the fold and given a chance to lead. And there's a great democracy to how Blue Note approached and gave lots of guys chances to record as leaders. It's one of the greatest testaments to Alfred Lyon and Frank Wolf, that body of work that they do from 55 through 65. It's pretty incredible. And it's really sad how different post 67, when the sale happens, just how different everything becomes. It doesn't even feel the same. But it's a beautiful record. Nice little up-tempo swinging number here. If I recall, this is for Duke Pearson by Bobby Hutcherson. Joe Chambers wrote that last song. Joe Henderson wrote The Kicker. Step Lightly's by Joe Henderson, who Blue Mitchell also does. And Bella with another Duke Pearson track. Just wonderful. Look at that beautiful shine in the cover. It's really how this music was supposed to look and sound. But the nice thing about some of these unreleased stuff is it does give us a window into more of the Blue Note experience here. You know, I guess it did come out on CD at some point, but jazz on CD for me is always a diminished product. It never captures me quite the same way. The bass is never as full and as round. Driving around in my car, the horns sound brittle and in digital. To me, Miles' mute on digital, it's like a throat hammer. It's piercing. The vinyl has that warmth to it that just reproduces the sounds wonderfully. Tone Poet does a really nice job, and they present that product for a really fair price. I think it was $27 on Amazon, and it said it was going to take a month to ship, but they twice updated that and ended up getting it within 8 days or so. So I think they're being cautious with their estimates on shipping because of all the mess going on, but it did get to me fairly quickly. So don't be too scared to take that chance if you can't go into a local store and support them. I hope local stores are surviving. I don't live in the city anymore. I moved an hour plus away, and I don't get to shop at my local stores like I did all the time. So I'm very much limited to shopping online for the most part. Oh, excuse me. There's the great Joe Henderson. One thing I was really impressed by this record was how good the bass sounded. The bass is really hard and full. kicks pretty good. It really punches through hard. So anyway, that's the new Tone Poet Bobby Hutcherson record. A great addition to his catalog, and one that you should collect and grab if you have the chance to. I hope you dug the Pat Moran, Bev Kelly stuff. That stuff's pretty interesting. She's a great singer. Those Pat Moran records are fun. There's some vocal ensemble parts that are kind of light, but sometimes we need light. Sometimes we want a nice, sprightly ensemble. The Pharoah Saunders, it's a great record, but it deserves to be put in its proper place. And I just think too many of the modern reviewers and the vinyl community online all has the same records. They all have the same scope, the same knowledge. And when you have 5 or 10% of the canon, it just leads to a real echo chamber where everyone's buying the same stuff. And it's such a disservice to so much of this music that covered decades of American history. So, and of course the Finger Poppin' record is outstanding. It's outstanding. That record will swing your blues away, that's what Horace Silver was always about, was swinging the blues away. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Nice little quick episode, get us in and out today. Y'all be safe. You have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.